Hi, welcome back to Manohar Academy. In this lesson, we are going to discuss about initialization blocks. We have two kinds of initialization blocks, instant initialization block and static initialization block. So they are similar to our instance variables and class variables. Okay, now we have a class myDate and it has three fields, instance fields. We know that they will be provided with some default value of 000 because they are integers. But whenever we create this date object, let's say we want to have some default values to these fields. So we can assign those values when we are declaring those fields. Or in the constructor, we can provide some default values. Here I am calling specific constructor from the default constructor, but the intention is to provide some default values. So whenever we create an object, so the value of 1900 January 1st will be assigned. If we provide some date, particular date by calling the second constructor, that date object will be created. But let's say we don't want to have a constructor, we don't want to have any of these constructors, we just want to have the default constructor that is provided by the compiler. But at the same time, we want some initial values assigned to these fields, and we don't want to assign while declaring those fields. In that case, we can create a block and we can assign those values. So it acts just like a constructor, but it's not constructor, it's a block used for initialization. So this is called instance initialization block. It will be called every time a new object is created, and when it executes, it will provide the initial values for those three fields. So as I said, initialization block will be called every time an object is created. And if we have constructor, if we have default initializations while declaring, and if we have instance initialization block also, then the order of execution will be as this. So whatever default values we provided while declaring, so they will be executed first. After that, they will be overridden with the initialization block values. Then they will be again overridden with the constructor values. As I said, it's not much useful. And why I'm mentioning this particular concept about instance initialization blocks is you may be coming across this one in old code. When you are looking at some old code, you may be having that one and you may be confused what is happening here. So I don't want you to get into that situation. So that's the reason I'm mentioning here. Also, there is a concept or there is a technique called double brace initialization, but we are a long way from understanding this. To understand this, we need to understand inheritance, anonymous classes and all those things, but we are not yet there. So don't worry about this. Just have some idea about instance initialization block. There is another kind of block called static initialization block. This is somewhat more useful, but again, as I said, when we are discussing about static variables, that static variables are not that common. So this is also rarely used, but somewhat useful. So it can be used to provide the initial values for the static variables, not instance variable, but static variables. We have seen that, right? Static method, static variables. So the static block also will deal with static variables. Let's say we have a class student, and the next student ID we should fetch from some database. Here, to keep it simple, I just printed a message saying make a database call to find the maximum student ID. Then I am assigning some value. Let's say 9 is the maximum in the database, then I am going to assign 10. This block, unlike the instance initialization block, is marked with a keyword called static. That is what makes this particular block static block. And static block will be called only once for a class, not every time a object is created. It is not called every time a object is created, but it will be called only once, that too when the class is loaded into memory. Okay, enough with theory. Let's see that particular thing in the IDE. Here we have a myDate class, and here I am using the initialization block. So this is the initialization block, and inside that initialization block I am just printing a message to show you that every time a object is created, this particular block will be executed, and a value of 1900 will be assigned to year. So we are not assigning any value to month and day, but we are assigning value to only year. Okay, now in the main method, let's create some objects. So we have created two objects and we are printing them. So ideally we should get the initialization block executed twice, and only the year should be initialized to 1900. The remaining two fields should be initialized to 0. Okay, here we can clearly see that initialization block is called every time the object is created, and only year is set to 1900, but month and day they're having their default value. Even I assign some value here. Because of the order of execution, the year will be assigned 2000, but again the 2000 will be overridden by 1900. So even now if I execute, I am going to get the same result, 1900. But if I comment out this one, then this will be taking effect. So now I can see 2000. Okay, that is about instance initialization block. Let's talk about static initialization block. Here I have a student class. So here I have again a static block. As you can see here, this is highlighted with the keyword static. And here, let's say to get the next student ID, we need to make some database call. Then we can find the maximum student ID in the database. Then we will assign the next student ID to the static variable next student ID. So that is the plan, to assign some initial value to a static block, not a static block, to a static variable. This is somewhat common scenario, not that common, but it's somewhat useful. So now when the class is loaded, remember the class will be loaded only if you are creating any objects of that class, or if you are accessing the static fields of that class, otherwise it won't be loaded. So when the class is loaded, during the time the static block will be executed, this next student ID will be assigned a value of 10. But it won't be called every time a object is created. It will be called only once. So let's verify that one. Here first let me comment out this code again to show you that the class won't be loaded. So you can see that the class is not loaded. Now let me print a message. Okay, that is private. That is the reason I am not able to access. Just let me change it to public. We don't want to make it public, but I am just showing that. Okay, now I am not creating an object of this class, but nonetheless I am accessing some field, that is static field on the class. So this time the class will be loaded. So we can see the message saying the static initialization block is executed. Also we are seeing the value of 10, which is nothing but the next student ID. Okay, so that proves that if you are accessing that class, it will be loaded, otherwise it won't be loaded. Now I am creating two student objects. This time the static initialization block should be executed only once, not two times. So here we can see that even though I am creating two students, the static initialization block is executed only once, and it is assigning the next available student ID to that static field. So let's print out these objects. Now we can see that the objects are assigned next IDs, that is 10 and 11. Okay, that is all about this particular class. In the next class we are going to look at some existing or some classes available from the Java API. So we are going to see date first, then we are going to see string or maybe local date, then string. So we are going to learn about these three classes in the next lesson. Thank you once again. Last but not least, if you did not register, if you did not subscribe already, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel so that whenever I upload a new video, you will get an alert. Also, if you are benefited from this video, make sure you like this one and share it with your friends. That way they can also watch, they can also learn. See you in the next video. Thank you.